Good afternoon, everyone from Rome. My name is Giovanni Tartaglia-Polcini, and I'm the chair of the Sport Integrity Global Alliance. We have the possibility to share an important time dedicated to a webinar in the framework of the Sport Integrity Global Alliance for 2023. I am speaking from Rome, from the headquarters of the Eurispes, a primary institute of research in Italy. And the title of our webinar is exactly "The Fight Against Corruption in Sport, the Growing Role of Research." We have with us live Mr. Stefano Cavanna. He's a lawyer, a former counselor of the High Council of Judicial in Italy, and expert in the European Union program in capacity building devoted to Latin America. And Mr. Nicola Allocca, which is the president of the anti-corruption branch of the business committee to the OECD, and responsible of the compliance office of a primary Italian enterprise, a state-owned enterprise, Autostrade per l'Italia. We have also the honor to receive a video message by the CEO of the Sport Integrity Global Alliance, pre-recorded. But before launching this video message, let me say a few words about the corruption in sport. Sport is a source of inspiration and shared values, a factor of progress of human fulfillment that moves billions of people around the world. Sport is a fundamental right for both economic growth and social inclusion, supporting the Sustainable Development Goals, constituting the core of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. In addition, everyone knows about the nature of sport as a multi-billion-dollar industry with intricate ties to public and private interests. So the fight against corruption, the prevention of corruption in sport is essential, is strategic, is fundamental, not only to maintain this fundamental sector of our life clean, but also to ensure that we achieve one of the most important goals of the Sustainable Agenda, Development Sustainable Agenda of the United Nations. So, taking this into due account, the sense of the Sport Integrity Week is to call for action and create a raising awareness, the public opinion on the threat of corruption and related crimes to the world of sport. Please, we receive now and share the video recorded message of our CEO, Emmanuel Macedo de Medeiros.
Dear friends in Sport Integrity, ladies and gentlemen, buon pomeriggio, felice settimana dell'integrità nello sport. E benvenuti a tutti a questa conferenza organizzata per Eurispes in collaborazione con l'Alleanza Mondiale per l'Integrità e lo Sport. Scusatemi per favore, ma per rispetto della bella lingua italiana parlerò in inglese. And my first words are obviously to say how delighted I am to welcome you all in this high-level, tremendously important session where important critical issues will be dissected by three leading protagonists, three leading voices, three leading forces in the prevention and fight against corruption. I'm referring, obviously, first of all, to the SIGA independent chair and member of the scientific committee of Eurispes, Dr. Giovanni Tartaglia-Polcini. I would like also to welcome Dr. Nicola Allocca as the chair of the anti-corruption committee business at OECD, and of course, Stefano Cavallana, expert in the European Union capacity building programs and senior managing partner of ARCE. But the topic that brings us here, obviously, the background of all the discussions that will unfold is corruption. Corruption, which we know is not a moral problem, but also a threat to democracy, development, security, and human rights. Corruption, as we know it, erodes trust, undermines institutions, and fuels inequality. Corruption is truly a cancer that spreads throughout our societies and harms us all. But the question is, are we winning the war against corruption in sport, in business, in public sector? We have, of course, signed countless international conventions and agreements over the last money laundering and transnational organized crime continue infiltrating in sport and other legitimate sectors of our economy and our society? Have we paid due attention? And by we, I mean, first of all, the governments, law enforcement, international organizations, and the judicial system. Have we paid due attention to how crime and criminal syndicates have taken advantage of the COVID pandemic and the consequent social crisis and economic collapse? Against the fast-paced, increasingly complex and sophisticated global background that I have just described, I ask with legitimacy, are the existing conventions and legislations producing tangible results? The answer, ladies and gentlemen, is clear. No, they are not. According to the latest Corruption Perceptions Index by Transparency International, more than 2/3 of the countries in the world score below 50 out of 100, indicating serious problems of corruption. This global average score is 43, which has not improved significantly in the past decade. The report that I've just alluded to also shows that countries that perform well on the index have strong democratic institutions, consistent rule of law, a strong and participating civil society, and media freedom. On the other hand, countries that score low on the index suffer from weak governance, political instability, conflicts, poverty, and human rights violations. Corruption is not just a problem of developing countries or emerging economies. It is a challenge for developed countries and advanced democracies as well. And we have seen how many scandals and cases of corruption involving high-level officials, politicians, business leaders, and of course, sports organizations in recent years. These examples show an indisputable reality. And this reality is that corruption can affect any sector, any level, and any country. No one is immune. It must also be said, for those that consider international conventions as the silver bullet, that these conventions are not signed to be framed and hung on a wall. They are not an end in themselves, but a means to achieve a greater end. And that end will not be achieved, mark my words, if rhetoric prevails over action, and if grandiloquent proclamations with little substance prevail over real, meaningful results. So I ask you again, what are we prepared to do? I will tell you my opinion. We need to do more than just signing conventions. as important that they may be. We need to implement them and implement them effectively without delay. More than that, we need to enforce them rigorously. We need to monitor them closely. We need to hold ourselves and others accountable. We need to reward good practices and punish bad ones. We need to promote transparency and integrity, both in public and in private sectors. We need, ladies and gentlemen, to empower citizens and civil society to participate and oversee. We need to educate and raise awareness amongst all stakeholders, including the young generations. Governments need to stop turning a blind eye to offshores and tax havens, most of which operate in total opacity, in the dark, free from proper oversight and free from legal democratic scrutiny. Against this background, we must, and I dare to say, we will act together. Corruption was not invented by sport. Corruption is a much wider, deeper, serious problem. Of course, there is a lot that sports governing bodies can and must do. And they must do so much more that they have been doing. They cannot continue to live in denial. They cannot continue to adopt a protective attitude, as sport could be immune to all these matters. To face the reality is the first step. To acknowledge that there are problems and weaknesses and vulnerabilities is the second. To win the war against corruption in sport, we need to win the war against corruption in our societies and in global economy first. And we need to win it at all levels and critical areas. We need to invest a lot more in research if we truly want to know exactly how deep goes the rabbit hole, if we need to ascertain with proper rigor the weaknesses and vulnerabilities of the system, if we need to know what trends are unfolding and better prepare ourselves. This is one of the many reasons why SIGA and Eurispes are joining forces and signing a memorandum of understanding. Corruption, ladies and gentlemen, is, as I said, a global problem, and it requires a global solution. No country can fight corruption alone. We need to cooperate and coordinate at all levels, local, national, regional, and international. We need to share information and experiences. We need to learn from each other's successes, but also failures. We need to support each other's efforts and initiatives. We need to act now. Corruption is not inevitable. It can be prevented. It can be mitigated. It can be reduced. It can be exposed and prosecuted. It can be challenged and changed. But what we cannot afford is to continue wasting and wasting more time. Corruption is costing us too much in terms of money, resources, opportunity, trust, reputation, legitimacy, stability, peace, justice, dignity. Corruption is jeopardizing our future. We have, therefore, the responsibility, but also the opportunity to make the difference. We have the tools and the mechanisms to do so. So let's make of this Sport Integrity Week and what it stands for, what it symbolizes, a catalyst for real action. Let us make of this Sport Integrity Week not a podium to proclaim good intentions that never come to life, but to agree a roadmap for change. Let us make, ladies and gentlemen, let us make of this Sport Integrity Week not just a symbol of hope, but a source of inspiration. Thank you for your support. Thank you for taking part in this global movement. Thank you for supporting SIGA. And grazie mille. Enjoy the Sport Integrity Week. Make the best of it. And score a goal. A big goal for sport integrity. Grazie mille. Arrivederci.
Thank you, Mr. Macedo de Medeiros. Thank you, CEO of the Sport Integrity Global Alliance, for this insightful intervention. I consider the Sport Integrity Global Alliance and the mission of the prevention fight against corruption in sport one of the most important in the portfolio I'm trying to nurture in this period. And I can say that it is impossible to go on this kind of field alone. We need to stay together from the public sector, the civil society, the private sector, and also the academia. And this is the sense at the basis of the selection of speakers today. And let me begin from the first speaker, Mr. Stefano Cavanna. As I said before, he's a lawyer, expert in European Union capacity building programs, is an expert, is a former High Council of Judicial Power elected member in Italy. Stefano Cavanna is exactly as Nicola Allocca, a cavalier of the rule of law. And in this sense, let me highlight that in present time is distinguishing himself in providing for prevention expertise with the government of Peru and Ecuador in the fight against corruption, and also with some deepening in the penitentiary system. Thanks to Stefano Cavanna for his participation today. The intervention of Stefano is focused on the history of relevance of corruption and the fight against corruption in the world of sport. It is interesting. It could also give us a snapshot on the modality of growing, of the attention, of the multilateralism on this topic. Please, Stefano, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Giovanni. Good afternoon, everybody. And start. When addressing the issue of corruption in sport and possible actions to counter it, we cannot ignore the analysis of the evolution of the phenomenon and its overbearing emergence since 1970. Obviously, we will not consider individual cases which have too often affected judicial chronicles in many countries until they assumed international dimensions on the occasion of the global scandals that have unfortunately occurred in recent years. This is not the place to retrace events that have already been extensively reconstructed in their purely factual aspects. Compatible with the timing of today's meeting, I will therefore limit myself to a brief exposition, focusing on the evolutionary analysis of the phenomenon and the lines of contrast that have developed over the years. As already mentioned, and as effectively described in the draft concept note G20 Action on Sport under Italian Presidency 2021, from the 1970s until the turn of the last century, scientific and systematic doping emerged as the most serious offense in sport and had a high media profile. Starting with the classic case of the illicit alteration of sporting results, corruption in sport has expanded to include, in the last 15-20 years, new phenomena of corruption and sport-related crimes that have come to the forefront of the news. Corruption of officials of international sport organizations, organized crime within sport bodies, mafia infiltration, fraud in the wearing of major sporting events, and the procurement of related infrastructure, tax evasion, and other financial crimes. which expose patterns of corruptions. In this context, match fixing related to illegal betting and money laundering has become a major concern, as online betting has incredibly expanded the ability of criminal groups to operate through the dark web from distant bases and through networks capable of making huge profits according to well-tested schemes. Since 2015, other crimes in sport have also come to the fore, some directly or indirectly linked to corruption. Violence, gender discrimination, child trafficking, child abuse, racism, bullying, sexual harassment, and other human rights offenses, illegal working conditions, lack of basic health and safety conditions for athletes and workers. The dark side of sport has increasingly emerged. The integrity of sport as a general concept and the issue has taken a recognized form in the last 5 years. This alarming situation can be seen as the other side of the coin, considering the enormous success of sport as a social practice globally over the last 4 decades. From grassroots to professional, intersectoral tournaments involving all generations and social groups, sport has also become a business, increasingly influenced by market dynamics. However, the governing mechanisms have remained essentially the same as those conceived more than a century ago, when sport was completely amateur. This sector also suffers, therefore, from the typical problem of the fight against crime, consisting in the fact that, thanks to the obvious lack of limits to its action and the availability of huge economic resources, crime is always one step ahead by definition, since the rule of law often intervenes only after the fact and very, very rarely can it intervene in prevention. It's clear that the knowledge of corruptive phenomena in any sector is of fundamental importance, especially in order to develop intervention methodologies that also allow prevention through a holistic approach that cannot and must not neglect the role of all the actors and categories of such involved and potentially affected by the risk of corruption. In recent years, there was a big change in this respect. Until not so long ago, in fact, the focus was almost on the limited area of responsibility of the sport organizations, thus neglecting any multi-stakeholder approach. Since 2017, the focus of policies and actions has shifted to the tasks of public authorities, whose complementary efforts are needed to adequately address criminal offenses and violations of the rule of law and multilateral conventions. Phenomena that can no longer be labeled as mere sporting fraud cause serious social harm and therefore require consistent detection and enforcement. Since 2021, the G20 under Italian presidency, as mentioned before, has been the protagonist of a radical change of perspective consisting in the valorization of a multi-stakeholder approach, no longer aimed at defining the tasks of public organizations and sport bodies. In this new holistic perspective, as noted in the context of the G20, corruption and other sport-related crimes can only be adequately understood and countered through an awareness of the full range of risk that sport presents today. The traditional infrastructure of sporting environments, both cultural and organizational, on the part of sport bodies, state authorities, and private actors, is no longer functional to effectively address the new challenges. Different approaches and solutions are needed to successfully address a dark dimension of sport that has reached a scale far unmatched in the past. In this perspective, the first principle states that a comprehensive evidence-based understanding of the nature, scale, scope, and risks of multifaceted corruption in sport is key to the successful development and implementation of effective measures to tackle this problem. The G20 goals elaborating the high-level principles of tackling corruption in sport are well described in the conclusive part of the document. In this part, the G20 direct his action not only to the sport organization that are considered in every situation, but also to include the other figures that are in activity in the sport context, in the sport environment. So, for example, one of the principles is directed to the regulation of professional activities of the agents, intermediaries, advisors, and representative of athletes, and the transfer of the athletes between clubs, associations, and sport organizations to prevent corrupt conduct and unethical behavior and ensure financial transparency, also through the development and adoption of codes of conduct. This innovative line of action was taken up by an important and very recent position statement of the United Nations Office of Drugs and Crimes, UNODC, which in 2019 initiated a comprehensive thematic study of corruption in sport. The study aimed at examining how to protect sport from corruption and crime, and was crowned with a very recent and deeply articulated report entitled Global Report of Corruption in Sport, consisting of 10 sections covering every issue related to the profile of corruption in the sports sector. The approach of this fundamental work is described in the executive summary, offering for the first time a truly comprehensive look at corruption in sport. The Global Report on Corruption in Sport reveals the staggering scale, manifestation, and complexity of corruption and criminal networks in sport at international and national levels. The Global Report explored a wide range of issues, analyzing the role of illegal betting, manipulation of competition, abuse in sport, and the susceptibility of major sporting events to corruption and organized crime involvement. It also highlights the changing landscape of sport and its relationship to corrupt practices, existing initiative to address the problem, issues related to the detection and spotting of wrongdoing, and how existing legal frameworks can be applied to tackle corruption in this sector, offering a roadmap to effectively tackle crime and corruption in sport. The global report also sets out policy consideration to help tackle these problems. Finally, we can't forget the extremely important and proactive contribution on the issue made by the efforts of the Sport Integrity Global Alliance, SIGA. SIGA, as explicitly acknowledged in the draft concept note of the Italian G20 presidency, is an independent and neutral coalition involving international stakeholders from multiple industry sectors, which assesses, monitors, and evaluates the level of implementation and the compliance of sport organizations with the SIGA Universal Standard on Sport Integrity through the Sport Integrity Global Alliance Independent Evaluation and Verification System. The development and ongoing implementation of the series system of the SIGA has certainly been an important step in the long and complex journey towards the full establishment of legality also in the sports sector. Thank you for that attention.
Stefano Cavanna for this historical snapshot about the evolution of the fight against corruption in multilateralism and with the sense of involvement at national level, we can say that there is really a great involvement of Italy in this multilateral progress. As Mr. Cavanna said, during the 2021 G20 anti-corruption working group presidency, in the framework of the presidency of the forum, was adopted the set of high-level principles, but also before we had 2 resolutions about corruption in sport. So we marked with the contribution of other countries and multilateral organizations this new agenda. The webinar is conceived to highlight what could be the role of research for future, in particular the growing role of research for future against corruption, with particular reference to sport. My idea was at the very beginning of organization of this webinar to give a voice to one of our colleagues, another cavalier of the rule of law, Mr. Nicola Allocca, who has written a relevant page at, if I may allow myself, at philosophical level, not only in practice, speaking clearly about the possibility to reduce corruption to zero, but not only as a slogan, but with a knowledge and also thought, developing the approach from the private sector experience to this relevant topic for our human race development. And in that sense, it's a pleasure to give the floor to Nicola for his presentation, both from the side of a primary industry and, on the other hand, on the primary committee inside one of the most important international organizations, governmental organization. Please, Mr. Nicola Allocca, the floor is yours.
Thank you, John. I have a presentation. Please tell me if you can see I'm putting on the screen. And if you can put mute. Okay, first of all, I would like to thank Eurispes Institute and SIGA for the invitation I am really honored to be part of this great panel with such distinguished speakers. I have two targets for this contribution. One is to illustrate the Zero Corruption Manifesto issued by the business at OECD, but the main target will be to try to transfer to the audience the sense of urgency and the responsibility that we have to face a cross-cutting global issue. In order to do it, I would like to start with the breaking bias exercise. Imagine being the head of a laboratory that works to defeat an incurable disease. Would you invest your money, your effort in trying to minimize the impact of the disease, or would you aim at identifying a vaccine in order to eradicate it? If corruption is the disease that impacts on the progress and undermines democracy, would you structure your anti-corruption programs aiming at managing corruption risk or eliminate it? In order to explain this vision switch, in the following slide, I put on a chart on the horizontal axis the anti-corruption behavioral evolution, and I matched it with the compliance maturity models of organization. So the anti-corruption behavior started officially, according to me, in the late 90s with the OECD Anti-Bribery Convention that has set a very important tipping point in anti-corruption behavior. First of all, 44 different countries committed in fighting corruption and started a change management process, starting from declaration to commitment. This was really important because this convention helped the governments to pass new laws, to strengthen the existing regulations, and also to foster effective enforcement. So it was a milestone in the fight against corruption and started an anti-corruption behavior. The second tipping point was into 2018 with the B20 Integrity and Compliance Task Force. The B20 was in Argentina at that time, and there was a very important paper that clearly stated that the commitment is not enough, but commitment on integrity and ethical standards should be translated into actions. So with this new approach, we started to implement our anti-corruption programs with the aim of minimizing the corruption risk. And this is the actual best practice in anti-corruption programs. But this year, during the Global Anti-Corruption Integrity Forum of the OECD, that put on the same table more than 115 countries, there was a vision switch. There was a clear message that says it is not enough to translate the commitment into actions, but these actions must have an impact. So the vision switch says clearly that when we put in place an anti-corruption program, we have to change our vision and we have to start our race to zero. I think that everybody agrees that corruption is a cross-cutting global issue that we must face together in order to assure a sustainable future and progress on long-term challenges. If we allow corruption to deprive the next generations of key resources such as education, healthcare, security and safety standards, social welfare, environmental rights, we will inflict an intolerable burden of inequality on our children. For this reason, we must have the courage to admit that it is possible to eliminate corruption. I repeat because it is really important. It is possible to eliminate corruption. And we must have the intellectual honesty to give this target its proper dignity within the UN agenda as a new SDG, zero corruption. In order to translate this commitment, zero corruption, new SDG, into action to impact, we have drafted at Business at OECD a manifesto. It is a multi-stakeholder paper that has the aim to sponsor the 18th SDG and summarizes the 10 golden rules in the fight against corruption. It is based on OECD and other fora best practices and has the ambition to summarize more than 1,500 recommendations issued by OECD in the last 25 years. I will go through each of these golden rules very, very quickly. First rule, we have to break the bias that corruption cannot be eliminated. So raising to zero is our mantra. Second rule, zero tolerance. We have to strive for zero tolerance against any form of corruption within all jurisdictions in order to level the playing field. Number 3, stimulate responsible conduct. Profits generated outside ethical boundaries cannot be considered as a profit anymore. This means that there is no trade-off between performance and compliance, results and rules, business and values. This means that corporations should start to evaluate their actions not only under an economic and financial point of view, but also considering the social and the environmental impact of these actions in the context where they happen. Number 4, corruption is a crime that can also undermine human rights. So anti-corruption and human rights programs share the same roots. Number 5, we have to incentivize and protect the so-called good guys, the brave voices. Whistleblowing is a key instrument in the fight against corruption. We must to enable a speak-up culture and to implement whistleblowing processes in all the organizations. Number 6, alone we cannot go anywhere. Giovanni clearly said, let's stay together in the fight against corruption. And collective actions, it's really important for enabling a multi-stakeholder approach. On this, I would like just to underline that we have today Giovanni Tartaglia Porcini, who is one of the father of the multi-stakeholder approach in fighting corruption, through also his leadership in the International Anti-Corruption Coordination Table of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the International Cooperation of Italy. And I think that this is one of the most important rules because we have to establish trustworthy relationships between all the key stakeholders, between government, civil society, and private sector. And this is fundamental. Number 7, artificial intelligence, technological solutions, innovative solutions are game changer in the fight against corruption. We have to use artificial intelligence to increase compliance capacity. We have to use artificial intelligence in order to enable continuous monitoring systems that analyzes 100% of data giving real-time results. This will increase the capabilities of corporations to fight corruption. Number 8, when we think about an anti-corruption program, we have to think global, but we have to act local, considering the peculiarities of the local contexts and considering also a different approach for micro, small, medium enterprises. It is really important because, for example, in Italy, MSME are the backbone of our economy, and we cannot think to design an anti-corruption program without considering the budget constraints of these entities. Number 9, we talked about human rights. Free press is a human right. So promote freedom of press, the so-called vigilant media, is key to fight corruption, because press can help in the fight against corruption and protecting our society by uncovering the truth and providing transparency. Last but not the least, as I started, corruption is a cross-cutting global issue. So the benefits from zero corruption has a positive impact on the achievement of the other SDGs. So for the moment, Giovanni, I will leave you the floor and I will stop with this. Thank you.
The manifesto is an example of how it's possible to push on the global agenda with innovative and transformative proposals. And I can say that we are in the temple of the research. The free research in Italy is represented through and by entities as the Eurispes. The research is the basis of the development and also the deepening of the new tools and the new possible ways for a new era of enforcement. Let me provide for some example before going on my intervention, on my speech. We had 4 different fields. And these fields, we have experimented how. The first step is research. The second one is the raising awareness at governmental level, but also in the private sector level, in this multi-stake, multi-shareholder approach. The third one is the so-called issue advocacy. There is the need that somebody take the mission with the engagement, personal engagement, to push on the agenda every time, making efforts. And the last, but the most important one, is the call to action. And this week is a week for call to action. People and new entities. And your presentation, Nicola, was exactly in that sense, calling to action for zero tolerance of corruption. What are the 4 fields of our efforts? The first one was measuring corruption. You all know that the measurement of corruption is one of the most important pieces of work of our last years. And exactly, moving from research, we have achieved also international documents at the governmental level, at the multilateral level. The same we have lived with sport, beginning from the research and going through multilateral efforts. We have also another one, the so-called holistic approach to the fight against corruption, considering in the same time that corruption is changed and you have corruption in the form of the infiltration of organized crime in economy and civil society. And we have also the 4th one is the capacity building one, but this is a new chapter we have to write for future. So please let me share my video with the presentation, and I go quickly to share with you, focusing on one of the most important threats we have today is represented by the danger of the interest of illicit group, but with special reference to the organized crime interest in sport. Please, next. As you can see, sport, we have realized it is a primary laboratory for testing prevention and regression strategies. And we have heard about the multi-stakeholder approach, the need of integrity guidelines, compliance, governance, and risk management models. And for preventing and combating corruption in sport, we need to go in depth to try to understand what is happening to the world of sport today. Next slide, please. In that sense, we have to cover all the form of manifestation of corruption in sport, from the illegal betting to the match fixing to the doping, and also going to the disturbance of public procurements and the corruption in major public events adjudication. And in this case, let me speak frankly about new form of corruption. We know the liquid one we're going to speak about later. We know the strategic one, but now we are also in front of the possibility of the geopolitical corruption. It's one of the most dangerous. We are now reconstructing at the research level. Please, next slide. The year of corruption within in sport has focused the links between sport, organized crime, and money laundering, and their impact on public and private. Next slide, please. Here you can see summarized the characteristic of the modern organized crime with respect to the common criminality, and you can see that one of the most important is the search for profit. If sport is a multi-billion-dollar industry, we have not to be surprised that sport is invaded by criminal organization interests. Next slide, please. And you can see here some projection of this approach, how the illicit interest can affect the sports sector through different channels. And I don't want to classify, I don't want to rate. They are all common dangers we have to take into due account. Next slide, please. And so you can see also the modi infiltrandi of organized crime. That's the same. When organized crime try to infiltrate economy, when organized crime try to infiltrate administration, the modality are exactly the same. Next slide, please. You can see the features of modern organized crime, and let me say two things about this slide. The accuracy selection of sectoral influence of an infiltration is not a case, it's not by chance that the organized crime has selected sport as one of the main nodes of entrance in the economy of crime. And at the end of this slide, you can see also what's the ultimate scope. The ultimate goal of organized crime is the cultural acceptance of corruption. Please go ahead. Next slide. And now we go just a little bit in with reference to what criminal organizations are attracted to, and in particular, selecting three different reasons. First, the enormous economic interest that orbits around sports, especially when considering the professional football sector. I am perfectly conscious that I am saying something of strong. But if we have economic interest on one end, and on the other end, we have to consider that we have no so regulated sector, because in sport, in respect of the Olympic spirit, we cannot insert our rules by the governmental side, but these can generate, in some case, impunity. And so the economic illicit interest of the organized crime look at the sport also as a foreign shopping area. The second reason is the end of proselytism and the gathering of a consensus that is necessary for the criminal organization, especially mafia-type organization, to root in the territory and the fan club sector, which becomes fertile investment ground. Of course, there is not only an economic interest, but also a geopolitical interest. Third one is the visibility that sports events, due to their strong social and media impact, are able to guarantee. And if you have an interest to do to yourself credibility and the control of territory, you have not to surprise yourself if you encounter mafia-type organization infiltrated in sports sector. And it is a problem affecting all countries, not only one or more. It's a global matter of fact that we have reconstructed, studying as a researcher, the documents of trials and investigation from Colombia to Italy, from Russia to Portugal and Spain. We have evidences of this kind of interest. This next slide. In that sense, you can consider that this is not a surprise. We have case law in Italy and abroad presenting this trend. Next slide, please. And looking at the history, we can remember what these two heroes, Giovanni Falcone and Paolo Borsellino, Italian magistrates killed by mafia in 1992, 51 years ago, had the opportunity to highlight. Mafias evolve and adapt to the socio-economic and political environment of reference. If sport is an economic sector higher in the product and the numbers in respect of other, for instance, fisheries and agriculture, it is normal that criminality looks at sport as a danger area, but also as a possibility to infiltrate and money launder. Mafias infiltrate the economy and politics at high level. We still need to adapt and improve the tools to counter the new forms and challenge of crime. There is nothing of news in this. We are reading the insight and the heritage of heroes of 40 years ago. Next slide, please. So you can reconstruct exactly what is happening in sport as it's happening in the other sector of infiltration. The vicious triangle with organized crime syndicates, which infiltrate through corruption the public administration and through money laundering the legal economy. The key words is infiltration. Next slide, please. So we want to use these key words and highlight what's the sense of facilitation. If this is the piece of danger, we have to focus our efforts on the piece of danger. How to avoid infiltration, how to prevent facilitation. Next slide, please. So we have to consider that when we look at mafia-type organization only in the evidence-based approach, we have the risk to don't see what is exactly under the sea, the base which provide for the iceberg to be so challenging for our tempus, for our momentum we are live today. Please, next slide. We have also the last examples I want to share with you. Examples of investigation about the possibility of criminal organization to infiltrate the sports sector with the aim to be conqueror of the management of sport clubs and also the sport facilities. You can see also the possibility that the sport organization, the sport is a focus for the criminal organization for betting and growing the phenomenon of match fixing. And at the end of the day, also the ticket scalping and the secondary ticketing activities. If you have one only football match producing thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars and euros only through the ticket, and you can have, without any rules, the possibility to resell and to be speculator on the tickets, you are creating the basis for the interest of criminality. And unfortunately, we have direct evidence of this. Next slide, please. You can consider that mafia today all around the world, from Latin America to Asia, is looking also to the amateur football societies, not only the professional one. Because one of the most important goals for mafia is a social consensus. As we build the social consensus on the good values, in the same modality, mafia takes this opportunity to create a social consensus on the bad values to have the control of territory. Next slide, please. So we go to these conclusions. We all need concrete possible ways to prevent the scheme of compliance in the framework of liability of legal persons, corruption plans, providing for the integrity universal standard, such as, for instance, the SIGA one, and focusing on the beneficial ownership transparency enforcement, because we have to avoid any form of infiltration of criminality and the dominion of the actors in the private sector of sport. And so I concluded my intervention in the content. Let me thank all of you for your attention, and I switch to my moderator role, and I ask to my colleagues, speakers online, one final, very quick message to complete this webinar today in the framework of the Sport Integrity Week. So we can close my PowerPoint presentation and come back. I invert the order before to Mr. Nicola Locca for a very quick 1 minute message for closing this webinar.
Dear Giovanni, I would like to leave you with the essential truth about zero corruption, summarized in three sentences. It's on, it's us, it's a must. It's on because zero corruption is already happening. We pushed the button from off to on. It's us, as you perfectly said, only together can we make it happen. And it's a must. Zero corruption exists because we do not have plan B. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nicola. This is a very good message, because the plan B is very dangerous when we assess with so great challenge and dangers. We have to clarify that there is the impossibility to have a tolerance at cultural level of corruption. No corruption, no tolerance for corruption. Thank you again. Now is for Stefano Cavanna, please, a quick message for closing this very interesting webinar. Also thanking again Mr. Stefano Cavanna for his contribution.
Thank you. I would like to regret Giovanni Tartaglia Polcini and Nicola Locca because they give a concrete view to my part, historical part, and they implemented the principle that in the perspective to not maintain the principle in a level and the dimension of abstract principle. I think that a holistic view of the problem of corruption in sports must translate into the development and implementation of concrete intervention methodologies that can't be separated from the in-depth study of the phenomenon. And in this sense, I think that the action that can be implemented in the future will primarily concern the training and awareness of all those involved in sports in order to establish an integrated and interconnected system that addresses corrupt risks from multiple sides. Thank you very much, Giovanni and Nicola. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stefano, also for this last message. Let's say something also closing from my side. First, we have to consider the role of research, the core business of our webinar. We have demonstrated that the research, when it's free and totally autonomous, can create a basis for the progress, the development of human race. It was in past, we are experimenting nowadays, and we hope for future also ensuring to our young people, young generation, better future. And how not in the focus of the dreams of the new generation, the sport. Sport is an opportunity for new generation. It's also an opportunity for large part of our planet. In some case, the most poor part of our planet looks at sport as a probable and a possible key of progress. And to fulfill these, we have to consider that the only possibility we have is a new era of enforcement in prevention and in repression. Because considering as a value, an untouchable value in the sports sector, the autonomy of sport, we cannot affect the Olympic spirit and the Olympic rules. We have to do our best to avoid any form of impunity and any form of loopholes, exactly as today was so clearly said. So we have done a great work together, as Mr. Stefano Cavanna highlighted, and we have probably a great work to do, as Mr. Nicola Locca. Thank you for your attention today. See you soon on the field of prevention, repression, corruption in sport. Thank you to the Sport Integrity Global Alliance that I have the honor to chair. And thank you also to the Istituto Eurispes, Istituto di Ricerca di Studi Economici, Politici e Sociali, one of the most important research actors all over the world.